This is Voice of Michelle Quinn. I'm going to walk you through how to make the new mask kits here that we just got for masks 1x1. In your kit, the main part and the important part are the pre-cut fabric pieces, and you should have at least 2 different styles. And then you're going to have a whole bunch of either fabric strips or elastic to do the bands with. And then some of the kits, if not most of them, have wires that look like twisty ties, and these go on the bridge or nose of the mask to help it sit up against your nose. What you want to do to start your sewing project is on your 2 different types of fabric. One's going to be the outside of the mask, one's going to be the inside of the mask. You need 2 of each of these for each mask, and there should be enough for 10 masks per kit. And what you want is the proper right side of the fabric is going to be faced together, same pattern. And this one we'll have to turn around here. There we go, same pattern. Okay, first step is on this curve. I'm going to sew 1 single stitch along there. It's 3/8 seam allowance. And you want to make sure you're back stitching at the beginning and endings so that's nice and tight and doesn't unravel. Yeah. Okay, so you can see I've sewn along here. Now this is a new step compared to our last masks. Whenever you have a curve in sewing, you need to clip the seam. And this is not going all the way up to the thread because I don't want to make a hole in it. But every maybe inch or so, I'm just snipping about 3/4 the way through there. And this allows the fabric to lie flat when you turn it, when you have a curve. Okay, what we want to do next is now it's time to open this up, and you'll see this nice curve, and you can just take your fingers and open up that seam a little bit. And then on the inside, we want this seam to all sit towards the right, just one direction. There we go. See, that's all sitting the same direction now. And I'm going to top stitch, I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to top stitch right down along here, and it's going to keep this seam nice and flat so that when we put the mask together, there's not a big lump of fabric. Ready? All right, so when you top stitch this, notice that I'm on the side where the seam is not, that all that clipped fabric is underneath me, and notice that it's turning to the side here, and I'm going to top stitch down that side, which for this is right over here. And the top stitching, we want to be pretty close to the seam. So you'll see on here that I'm going to keep this seam about 1/8 of an inch off of my needle. Okay, so you can see this nice top stitching that we did on both sides. The lining should be a little bit smaller, so when I have these lined up, you can see this is the smaller of the 2 on the length. So this should be the lining inside the mask. What you want to do is these edges are going to be finished and not left raw because there's going to be a pocket to put an optional filter in these masks. So you're going to turn this over, and on the edge, you're going to turn it up 1/4 of an inch, and then you're going to turn it up again 1/4 of an inch. So 2 1/4 of an inch turnovers. And I'm going to pin this to keep it in place, or you can iron it to keep it in place. And then you're going to stitch along this length to hold this down, and that will finish the edge, and it will just stay that way. Okay, so on here we have this stitch shut. So again, this is a nice finished edge, and this is going to be the inside of the mask. We're going to do right sides together. It's easiest to find the center here and match those up first. And so I'm going to pin that and then pin out to the sides. Okay, I just want to show you this all pinned right sides together, and a reminder that this is going to stay open. You're not going to sew this down because this is what makes the pocket if you want to put a filter into these masks. So I'm just going to be sewing along the top and along the bottom here. Okay, so I want to show you on the sewing machine. Again, we're not sewing on this long part. We're just starting here where the shorter fabric comes in. And you do want to make sure you top stitch this because this is going to get a little bit of wear and tear. So forward, back, forward again, and then it's just the same 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around here. Okay, so I've sewn along the top and along the bottom, and I've left this open because I'm now going to flip it inside out. Okay, on the mask, when you turn this right side out, we're going to press this down, and you'll see how this naturally wants to kind of turn in. We're gonna press this down. So with my iron, and we'll do the same thing over here. And this is because we want this not to be a raw edge. We're gonna sew over that later and actually finish it. So same thing here, we're gonna turn this down and just press it down a little bit. Doesn't need to be a lot. 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch is fine. So later at the very last step, what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn this over and have it not overlapping, but we're gonna sew it. It's gonna make a channel that you put the cord through. Or if you're doing fabric cords, we're gonna encase the fabric cord in there, turn it over, and sew it all down. Okay, we're gonna go over how to put the wire in the mask. And these wires are like twisty ties, most of them. It doesn't really matter what type of wire you're using. These are quite long, so you do want to kind of bend the edges. This also takes the sharp edge off so it doesn't poke through the fabric. Most of the recommendations I've been reading are about 3.5 inches. So this I'm just going to bend over. All right, so now that that's not pokey on the edge and it's not as long, you do kind of want to find the middle of this because you're going to use this to mark your mask. We're gonna make a little pocket or channel to slide this wire into. I've made a paper version of the mask so I can kind of show you what this looks like before I do it on the fabric version. So this is my paper version of the mask, and I'm gonna take the top part and the center and use it as a guide so I can see where I'm gonna start my channel for this wire and also where I'm gonna end my channel for this wire. And I'm gonna mark this. On the fabric mask, you mark it with a pin, but I wanna show you what I'm gonna sew, so I've got a marker here. So when we go to sew, there's gonna be a whole bunch of stitching back and forth right here to make this little channel. And then there's gonna be stitching along here. And this is why you mark both sides with the pin, so you know how far to make this. Stitching along here, and then you're gonna stop, and you're gonna thread this wire into that pocket, and then you're gonna enclose the wire into the pocket by stitching back and forth a whole bunch here. So now the wire is in the pocket of the bridge of the nose. And then the next step after we do that is to finish this top stitching so it looks pretty, is we're just gonna top stitch along here. And we don't want to stitch anywhere with the wire, and this is already done. So and then we'll skip over to the other side of the mask and do that same, extend that top stitching on the top to the end here. And then you have that nice top stitching along the top, and then we'll repeat it along the bottom as well. So on my fabric mask, I've got my wire. This is the fabric mask we're working on. Again, center to center at the top here. And if I follow this around, okay, it's going right down to about here. I'm gonna mark that with a pin. So that's where I'm gonna start sewing. And we're just gonna make a little end of the channel here. And then going around here, I'm gonna grab another pin, mark the end of that channel. And if you line your mask up, they should be roughly in the same spot. That's a good double check. So that looks good. All right, let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, we're gonna sew a little 3/8 inch channel right where this pin is. So I'm gonna take my pin out so I don't sew over it. And we're just gonna go back and forth a bit. So you can see that right there. And now I'm gonna sew the other part of the channel across the bridge of the nose. Okay, so you can see that we have this nice pocket for the wire to slot into. So now I'm gonna thread the wire into the mask. And this is a little on the fiddly side. And a lot of it is by feel. Okay, so I've threaded it all the way down here. I can feel that it's hit on the end here. And then I can feel that's gone all the way over here as well. So now that that's in, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sew this to encapsulate the wire, and I'm gonna finish up that little part that I missed at the end. So we're gonna finish this top stitching so that this extends from the beginning of the short piece to where we started with the nose wire bridge. So I'm gonna start again on the beginning of the short piece of fabric. I get up to where the nose bridge is, I'm actually gonna skip over to where it finished here and pick up where I left off. Got the top stitch done on the top, and now I'm just gonna do the top stitch for the bottom. And again, it's starting where the shorter piece of fabric is. Okay, so on our mask, if you'll remember, we ironed these 3 sides of the longer fabric down. And the last part of making the mask is making this channel that the ties go through. So this needs to be turned over so this raw edge is not exposed. And then we're gonna turn it over again until it goes right up against the lining fabric. And we don't wanna sew this lining pocket down because this pocket is where the filter goes, but we are gonna be right up against it. It's a pretty tight little channel. And you'll see when I stitch this, I'm gonna stitch this really close to the edge here to keep this down. Because if you're doing elastic, you actually have to be able to get a small safety pin through here and it just fits. So I'm gonna show you, if you have elastic that comes in your kit, you're gonna take a small safety pin, and this is what you're gonna use to thread this elastic through the channel, and it's a very tight fit. You can do it. This is a mask that I did, and you'll see how the elastic naturally just pulls the fabric here. You can either tie the elastic into ear loops. On this particular mask, because these elastic pieces are kind of long, and I didn't want to waste any elastic, I actually sewed the elastic together. So I have one loop going this way, one loop going this way, and I sewed them together so that this can be worn front to back. So this goes around the head. Most of you are probably going to have fabric rather than elastic, or if you don't like the fiddliness of fishing this elastic through the loop, a lot of you should be familiar with the fabric ties that we were using for the surgical mask style, which we were doing before with the pleats. And a lot of these kits have these fabric strips that are there to make ties out of. In looking at this pattern and this these strips, these are about 2 inches longer than the ties we were using on the old pattern. So if you want to cut them down to from 20 inches to 18 inches, that's absolutely fine. If you just want to leave them long, then the person wearing it's just going to have a little extra room to tie the tie. This one that I have in my hand is actually 2 pieces of fabric stitched together to make one long tie right here in the center. And if you zoom out, the reason for that is I can take the center of this tie and actually put it into the mask here. And I'm gonna turn, again, this is turned over so it's not a raw edge. I'll turn it over again and encapsulate that tie under the fabric, and then I'm gonna stitch this down so it doesn't go. So the end result before you sew is gonna look something like this, where we have the tie folded over in the fabric of the front of the face mask, and we're not sewing on the lined pocket part, but we are turning this up so that it comes right up against it. Okay, if you're doing ties and you're sewing them in, you've got it all pinned, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna sew right along here, and it's gonna be very close to the yellow fabric, but not on the yellow fabric. Okay, so you can see on here that I've sewed down this area, leaving the pocket open so that you can put a filter in there if you want. And we've been working on these masks with the side facing the mouth kind of popped out the wrong direction. So the last part here is you're just gonna turn this over. And this is the actual outside fabric here. And so we've got the nose wire on the top, over the bridge of the nose, your nose and mouth, and then these are gonna tie around your head in the back. And you're done. Okay, this is the end product. You can see the ties in the back. And that is the end of our video. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you for all your service and good luck sewing.